One sunny day in March, long ago, a young boy stood by the gates of the Austin Motor Company. Most days after school he stood there. He liked cars best in all the world. This day his eyes widened because this car was different. It was blue with a black hood and 4 brass lamps. But what made it so different was the curly brass horn bolted to the windscreen. "That car's for me," he shouted, and the men laughed. It is the only car for me, he thought. But as he was only 7, he could do nothing about it. He walked home in a dream. Weeks later, Gumdrop was amongst all the other new cars in the showroom. A grand lady sailed in. "I am the Lady Mayoress, and I want a car in which I shall look my best." She stopped in front of Gumdrop. "What a magnificent motor! And it matches my dress to perfection." So she bought Gumdrop. Later that year, Gumdrop appeared in the Lord Mayor's procession. Soon, it started to rain, so the chauffeur stopped to put the hood up. "My new hat! It will be ruined!" screamed the Lady Mayoress. She was so upset about the hat that she decided to sell Gumdrop and get a saloon car. So Gumdrop was for sale again. One day, a small car drew up with Mr. and Mrs. Septimus Bunch and their 5 children. They wanted a bigger car. "Look at that!" they cried when they saw Gumdrop. It was big enough too, so Mr. Bunch bought Gumdrop. It took the children to school, it took Mrs. Bunch to the shops, and it took Mr. Bunch to town. Best of all, it took the whole family on holidays. They drove it up mountains, picnicked in shady woods, and went down to the seaside. Eventually the children grew so big they had to squeeze into Gumdrop and even push him up the steep hills. So in the end, Mr. Bunch had to sell him for an even bigger car. Freddie Bracegirdle bought him next, and he was a fireman. One day, all the fire engines were out when they had yet another call. "What shall we do?" the station commander said. "Hitch the trailer pump to my car," cried Freddie. Gumdrop got them to the fire in no time, and the fireman put it out. "Very well done," said the station commander. "We'll use Gumdrop again when needed." Gumdrop became very special. Everyone knew him because he was blue, not red, and they cheered when he flashed past. Gumdrop stood by bravely as the fireman fought the flames. He had many adventures, but eventually the station bought new fire engines, and there was no more work for him. Freddie had another car, and so he sold Gumdrop. The station commander gave Gumdrop a special badge to thank him. He was now an old car and somewhat battered. He was called Old Crock or the Heap. A grocer, Mr. Peabody Parsnip, now owned him, but he was worried what people might think when they saw such an old car at their smart front doors. A year later, he bought a new van and sold Gumdrop to Farmer Clodbury. Gumdrop worked hard at the farm. He would bring in hay from the field and carry timber for the fences. On Saturdays, young Giles Clodbury would give himself driving lessons round the meadow. One day, Farmer Clodbury had no more use for Gumdrop, drove him to an old barn and left him. The hens were very happy, though, and laid their eggs on Gumdrop's comfortable seats. Meanwhile, Gumdrop sagged more and more and more and began to rust away. One day, a scrap merchant called Charlie Mead happened to see Gumdrop in the barn. Farmer Clodbury was hard up, and so he sold Gumdrop for scrap. "Off you go to the breaker's yard tomorrow," said Charlie. Early next morning, a man came into the scrapyard. He saw Gumdrop and stared. "That's an Austin Heavy 12.4, and I bet it's blue under that dirt. And it's still got the brass horn," he said excitedly. "I think it's the one I remember as a small boy. I'll buy it." He did remember, and now he was none other than Mr. Josiah Oldcastle, and he had dreamt about Gumdrop for all of those years. "I would like to try the engine," he said. They fitted in a new battery and put in oil, petrol, and water. Then Mr. Oldcastle pressed the starter button. The engine started first time. "There's no doubt about it. This is my old Gumdrop." He could hardly wait to pay Charlie. He pumped up the tires and settled in the driving seat, and with a grateful wave to Charlie, he drove Gumdrop home.